So we're going to try to move quickly. Randy will be taking over class next week, and so I'm trying to get through chapter 11 and 12 today. I asked you guys to read some of that so we could jump around quite a bit, and then Randy will finish out chapter 13. So we almost made it. So next week, Randy will finish out chapter 13. And then we'll be done with 2 Corinthians. So we got to get through 2 chapters today. So we're going to try to do that. So if you turn to your Bibles in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, it starts off and it says, "I wish that you would bear with me in a little foolishness. But indeed you are bearing with me. For I'm jealous for you with a godly jealousy, for I betrothed you to one husband, so that to Christ I might present you a pure virgin. But I am afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, your minds will be led astray from the simplicity and purity of devotion to Christ. For if one comes and preaches another Jesus whom we have not preached, or you receive a different spirit which you have not received, or a different gospel which you have not accepted, you bear this beautifully. For I consider myself not in the least inferior to the most eminent apostles, but even if I am unskilled in speech, yet I am not so in knowledge. In fact, in every way we have made this evident to you all in all things." So, what we see here is at the first, Paul does not want to brag or boast about himself. Remembering his last words in chapter 10, he said, "But he who boasts, boasts in the Lord. For it is not he who commends himself that is approved, but who the Lord commends." So that right there we talked about last week or a couple weeks ago, which is it doesn't matter how loud you are about the things you're doing. You know, a lot of people like to talk about themselves and what they're doing and that's how they achieve something. And in the world, unfortunately, that's how it goes, right? You know, the louder you can be of what I'm doing and you make known yourself to your boss or anywhere else, you try to be, I've done this and I've done that, and you're loud about it. A lot of times that gets you moving forward. But in the kingdom of God, it's not so. It's not so that we boast in all these things that we do. We just keep our head down and keep doing the things for God with a genuine heart, and He exalts us. He sees. It's not about, well, I do all these things. And so Paul's saying these who boast in themselves, it's really nothing. They're not approved anymore by God. And so he's saying in himself, he knows that it's foolish to boast. So he starts off the next chapter and says, if you just bear a little bit more boasting, not because I want to do it, but because you're making me do it. You're making me show that I am qualified. And so when you have ever had to show someone that you're qualified for something, doesn't it require that you talk about yourself? Yes. It's almost impossible not to. If someone says, I don't know if you're qualified for this. Well, let me show you why I'm qualified. It's not boasting, it's presenting a case. It's not like you're just walking around doing it. Paul is having to present this case to them. Verse 2, Paul states he is jealous for them, but not a fleshly jealousy, but a godly one. Meaning he is not jealous because of selfish desire of his own gain, like some of these other people. He desired for them to be faithful to God. He wanted to present to them a pure bride to the groom that was coming. That says a lot about who Paul was to these people and how he looked at them. It's a really big deal. And so, 3, "But I am afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, your minds will be led astray from the simplicity and purity of devotion to Christ." So the apostle expresses concern of these Gentiles, worried that false teachers will lead them away from the message of truth that they had been given. Now, what other verse do you think of when you think of this same kind of warning? I'm afraid that you have been deceived and you're being led astray from what you once had. Does it remind you of another writing of Paul? Go ahead. Galatians 1, 6 through 7. Yep. "I'm amazed that you are so quickly deserting him who called you by the grace of Christ for a different gospel, which is really not another, only there are some who are disturbing you and want to distort the gospel of Christ. Satan, as he drew away Eve, is still working through the lost and the wicked to draw us away from the truth that we know, the pure truth of the word. So Paul brings that to light. Verse 4, Paul says, even though some may come and twist the message, the Corinthians have not accepted a different gospel. So first he starts off and he says in verse 4, for if one comes and preaches another Jesus whom we have not preached. He's starting to describe what it looks like to be led astray in a crafty manner. So if one comes and preaches another Jesus who we have not preached, this shows two things: that it's possible to preach something other than the Word of God, other than the gospel of God, but it also shows something else, right? It shows a negative and a positive. What is the positive in that statement? For if one comes and preaches another Jesus whom we have not preached, or you receive a different spirit which you have not received. It's like this positive and negative of each thing. So the negative is someone can come in and disrupt what Paul has already preached to them. So the positive is you've already heard the gospel. I've already preached to you Jesus. You're already a part of his church. And so he says, if someone comes along and preaches another Jesus, you've already heard Jesus. You already know of him. And that's much of what he has just said with Eve. He says, the serpent came in and deceived Eve and led astray from the simplicity and purity of Christ. And he doesn't want them to have that. And he goes, so you've had it. And then he gets to the last part and he says, or a different gospel which you have not accepted, you bear this beautifully. So then he highlights the positive. He's saying, even if people are among you doing this, you're not just fully accepting what they say. And he said, good job on you. That's good. And so he's reinforcing them. He's not having to pull them from they're just gone like the Galatians, where he's like, what? You have been completely led astray. He's saying, you are in the process of being led astray. There are wolves surrounding you, and you need to pay attention. And so, verse 5, apparently some were claiming to be super apostles in Corinth, or at least pointing out that there were other apostles better than Paul. You look at the first letter, I'm with Apollos, I'm with these other people. Or perhaps thought other apostles whom Christ had picked were better than Paul. But Paul admits that judging by his in-person speech, though it may not seem equal to them, he is. So he says in verse 5, for I consider myself not the least inferior to the most eminent apostles, but even if I am unskilled in speech, yet I am not so in knowledge. In every way we have made this evident to you in all things. So he points out that, is Paul a great speaker from this verse? I don't think he is. I don't think he is, in the sense of when you hear Paul speak, it may make complete sense when you remember in the book of Acts, and it's him and Barnabas, and they call one Zeus, and what is the other one? Mercury, Hermes, and so you have two like gods that they're calling them, and you're expecting when you're reading it for Barnabas to be called, the messenger, the Hermes, the Mercury, the lesser god, demigod, and then for Paul to be called Zeus when they're confusing them with gods. But that's not what we see. We see Barnabas is called the Zeus, I believe, I'm pretty sure. And when you read that, there's this feeling of, why would they think Barnabas is this more prominent figure? Well, probably because Barnabas was probably a better public speaker than even Paul was. And of course, it was wrong for them to consider them anything higher than what they were, which were mere mortals. But the point stands, which is Paul shows himself to be this person who can write so powerfully, guided by the Spirit. But in person, he's more of a weaker vessel when it comes to maybe he's not very strong with his voice and strong and able to speak. And there's other reasons that people have come up with, that he had these thorns in the flesh and something that may have hindered him to be able to speak, or his hindrance in person. But the whole point is he says here, himself, at least the way Paul's humble, so he may be a very good speaker, but compared to others, he may say, yeah, others are better at speaking. But that has nothing to do with knowledge, right? So just because someone can't get up here and speak a lesson doesn't mean they don't know anything. I have known many preachers who can get up and they can say a whole lot of nothing, but they can say it really well. Like they can preach very well in regards to how they talk. Silver tongues, you could say. They can very well preach on anything and make it interesting, but they're not preaching truth, or they're not preaching in a way that's teaching anything. And then there's those preachers who may not be able to hold attention for anyone and can't really speak very well. But you read their writings, and it's masterclass. It's masterful. They're just very good with penmanship and writing and able to bring across their point. And so we have different strengths, and we can understand that. Verses 7 through 10, or did I commit a sin in humbling myself so that you might be exalted? Because I preached the gospel of God to you without charge. I robbed other churches by taking wages away from them to serve you. And when I was present with you, I was in need, and I was not a burden to anyone. For when the brethren came from Macedonia, they fully supplied my need, and in everything I kept myself from being a burden to you, and will continue to do so. As the truth of Christ is in me, this boasting of mine will not be stopped in the regions of Achaia. Why? Because I do not love you? God knows I do. Paul had not accepted payment for his work among them so that it would not hinder the gospel. And sadly, some saw his refusal of being paid was because he thought he wasn't actually an apostle. Like, oh, you just feel guilty because you know that apostles deserve to be paid, or these doing the work of the Lord deserve to be paid, but you know that's not actually who you are. And he's like, that's not why I'm not accepting payment from you. It's not from a guilty conscience. It's because I love you. And it's so different from those peddling the word for money, 2 Corinthians 2:17. For we are not like so many peddlers of God's word, but as men of sincerity and commissioned by God. So he has good intentions. In verse 18, he continues, I robbed other churches by taking wages from them to serve you. Okay, so is this literal? Is Paul stick them up, put it all in the bag? That's not what he's saying, right? But it's graphic language because his point is, I tried so hard not to be a burden to you, but I did lean heavy on other members of the church. I did take from other congregations. I took a lot from other congregations so that they could fulfill my needs here and I could stay here and you would not have to. So he's saying, some other person was supporting me in those ways, but it wasn't you. Verse 9, and when I was present with you and I was in need and I was not a burden to anyone, for when the brethren came from Macedonia, they fully supplied my need, and everything I kept myself from being a burden to you. So Macedonia, who we read was giving from their poverty, was helping Paul. And Paul is telling them this. He lived in a way among them to try not to be a burden to them at all. And we learn more about that from chapter 9, that they were aiding and supplying his needs even before he asked for this gift. Verse 10, Paul continued to deny help from them while there so that he could remind them why, which is he doesn't want their money. He wants them to obey the Lord. And he must have saw something within them as a Gentile city to say, I am not going to take money. I just want to give you Jesus, and I'm going to work alongside you, and I don't want a single payment, although I can take it. He proved that in 1 Corinthians, but I won't. Verses 12 through 15 say, "But what am I doing? I will continue to do, so that I may cut off opportunity from those who desire an opportunity to be regarded just as we are in the matter about which they are boasting. For such men are false apostles, deceitful workers, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. No wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. Therefore, it is not surprising if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness, whose end will be according to their deeds." Paul makes it clear that what he is doing, he will continue to do, because this was an opportunity that was able to show them the difference between him and who? Him and who? False teachers. He's saying, if I have to give up money that God says I can live off of from the church, if I have to give up taking anything from you, when he says no burden at all, he's not just talking financial. Think about the time that they're in. I'm not asking to live with you. I'm not asking for food. I haven't asked you for anything. Now, they may have supplied it at times, but he never asked. He never was putting a burden of guilt or any feeling on them ever. I did not ask for anything. I was not a burden to you in any way. And he goes, that is one way that it will set me apart from these supposed godly men among you who are leading you astray. He said, compare my work and what I have done to them and see that there is nothing I get from you but hopefully your love, support, and that you'll obey Jesus. And so that's a really good point. Hopefully that would open their eyes and help them to see. Verse 13, those that accepted pay and opposed Paul were impostors pretending to be someone special. They worked, but hidden beneath their work were bad motives and intentions. Since they were not called of Christ, they declared themselves to be important people and making these decisions about Paul and others. So, verse 14, the apostle says something shocking here, which is the idea that evil men will present themselves as godly men, and that's not a rare thing. He says, wolves will in fact often disguise themselves as sheep. That is why we must pay attention. And he says this by talking about the devil presents himself to man as one seeking man's good, as he did with Eve and Adam in the Garden of Eden, and as one bringing about light and not darkness. But that's not who Satan is. And so Paul points out and says, if you think just because you're in a church that there are not evil people among you, or the potential or the possibility that someone with bad motives who does not actually love God the way that they portray and have other motives behind them, he says you're wrong. Because even Satan was in the Garden of Eden, and that he was among Adam and Eve, and he presented himself not as wicked, but as a helpful friend, as one in giving aid. And he goes, that's oftentimes how wolves can be among sheep, is they can make it seem like what they're doing is good. And he says, so don't be surprised by this. Don't be surprised then that the devil's minions, and that would include not just this spiritual realm, but those who are walking in accordance with the devil. Jesus said that those who are not in line with the Father and who are getting in line with the Son are children of who? Satan. Children of Satan. He was not pulling any punches. And so those who are not in line with God are, whether they know it or not, working with the devil and what he's trying to achieve. They may not know it, but they are. And in those ways, we should not be surprised when there can be those who dress themselves as light and disguise themselves as friends, and those who support you and are actually trying to get something from you, trying to devour you, trying to hurt you. And you hope in a body like this one that we know each other well. So it doesn't mean you're sitting here like puts up guards. That's not what you want. You don't want people to walk around with guards put up all the time. It does mean, however, to be aware. Be aware of your surroundings and people, and trust people when, lean with trust, but also make sure you're paying attention to people's motives. If people don't love Jesus, it starts to show. It starts to shine through, or I would say appear through cracks. And that's not our place to judge people's motives. But sometimes people can do such foolish and terrible things that it's not a judgment of humans, but it's a judgment of God that has come upon them when they're doing awful things amidst the church. Verses 16 through 20, again I say, let no one think me foolish, but if you do, receive me even as foolish, so that I also may boast a little. What I'm saying, I'm not saying as the Lord would, but as in foolishness, in this confidence of boasting. Since many boast according to the flesh, I will boast also. For you being so wise, tolerate the foolish gladly. For you tolerate it if anyone enslaves you, anyone devours you, anyone takes advantage of you, anyone exalts himself, anyone hits you in the face. To my shame, I must say that we have been weak by comparison. Again, Paul says, once again, asking them to bear with him as he defends his apostleship. I know it's foolish. I continue to know it's foolish, but I press on because you must know that I'm qualified. Verse 17, he's arguing from a human perspective now, which is not how the Lord did. Jesus never boasted about being a better human than others. He never played that card. He could have. So many times he could look and be like, I'm not just man, but just taking me as I am, as a human. I'm a much better human than you, Pharisee. He never said that. He never had to talk in such an earthly fashion. Paul is saying he knows it's not right. He knows it's not a very good argument in many cases. But this one, he has to prove to them that he is qualified, even among fleshly boasting. He will boast in the flesh, but only to show that he had more to boast about than the false teachers did. If the false teachers are saying, look how great of humans we are, Paul says, I can say it more. So even if we have to take it out of the spiritual realm and go straight fleshly, he says, I can also show that I am superior there too. They thought so highly of themselves that they were willing to listen to the boasting of others, thinking they will only be able to outdo them. But when they came to Paul, they were not able to outdo him. The Corinthians had patiently endured the foolish talk of these boasters. They had handled the sufferings that came from them being faithful among them, but Paul would not endure it the same way. That's why he's being tongue-in-cheek here. He says, you handle it so well when one slaps you, and when one tries to devour you, and when one tries to destroy you, you put up with it. And I hate to say by comparison,